Hey babe, thank you so much for ordering this reading from me. So, just as a quick reminder, whichever lifetime spirit shows you today is not necessarily your very first or your most recent past life. It is the one that spirit feels has the most connection to either what you are currently going through or some aspect of your personality in this lifetime, because our personality and the traits and the, sort of unfounded unconscious fears or things that we've just always been super into since we were little, or even our sense of humors or whatever, can all be sort of an amalgamation of experiences and things and who we have been in past lifetimes. So, the first thing that I just wanted to say getting into this is that anytime that you sort of look up things, historically, or you hear stories about things that are going to connect to this, like in history, it's always so freaking romanticized, where it's like, and just to kind of give you a little idea, because I was like, well, it'll make more sense as we get into the reading. So when they talk about like concubines or, the great conquest of these famous men through history, like Genghis Khan and, kings and their mistresses, it's always just this highly romanticized thing where it really, comes across like, oh, they were in love with each other and they had this torrid affair, and, or it was some kind of sneaky link, or oftentimes I hear, they try to kind of put a sort of manipulative, temptress, kind of explanation, or I don't know what you would call it, like on the female, where it's like, oh, she was, plotting and planning on King Louis XIV to be his mistress because she had designs to, get titles for her and all of her family and to be taken care of and join the aristocracy or stuff like that. When the reality of a lot of that is that either these were women who were kidnapped and basically sexually assaulted in order for these, torrid love affairs to take place, or their families forced them in front of these noble people, or, the king wanted them and it was like, I have no choice but to submit because otherwise I might end up beheaded or something. So it's always, the same way that they villainized Medusa when she was actually a victim, and made it that, oh, she was just so tempting. She just couldn't, these men couldn't help themselves, and she was a seductress, when really, in the Roman story, she was raped. So, this lifetime that spirit is showing for you today, and I apologize because I looked it up and I forgot to look at what the time period was, but it's easily looked up, was from India, the harems, and the Mughal, I think that's how you say it, it's Mughal, emperors during that time, because they were the most famous for their harems of women, and that they would have women from all these different countries, and they were there at their disposal as lovers whenever they felt like it, and they acted like, oh, well, because of that, they got to live these amazing lives in the palace and eat all kinds of nice food and have opportunities and clothes and things that they wouldn't have had otherwise. And Spirit is saying that you were one of the women that was in the harem at that time, and which also, just, what do you call it, etymology, word origins, whatever, haram, roots from harem. And haram means things that are like a sin, not okay, you know, within Islam. So, and it comes from that because it was excess, you know, lust, wars, like all of the bad things that we're not supposed to be engaging in, you know, were taking place during that time and in those, you know, spaces. So what Spirit is saying is that you were actually what we would consider to be Turkish, but your family was living in kind of the outer areas of India at that point in time. And Spirit is saying that when, you know, the emperor would send out his minions, people who worked for him, whatever you want to call them, to go find him women, because obviously these guys were not going and collecting the women for themselves personally. They weren't going from village to village and being like, can I ask your parents if I can have you, or kidnapping them himself. They had, you know, the people that worked within the palace with the king doing that for them. Kind of the same way that we got those celebrities that have their bodyguards and their assistants and whatnot, you know, go out in the crowds at shows and find girls to pull backstage, you know, to hang out with the celebrity afterwards. So Spirit is saying that, you know, one of the emperor, I may say king because, you know, I'm in the zone of channeling right now. It's an interchangeable thing anyways. Their representative traveled to your guys' area because Spirit's saying it was kind of a space where it's like a lot of people who were not originally from, like, it had a high immigrant population, basically. Like, that's how we would refer to it today. And so they were out there scoping out, you know, the exoticals and trying to figure out, you know, can we get a Polish girl? Can we get an Armenian girl? Let's get all the flavors for the emperor. And so Spirit is saying that you were known as a very beautiful woman in that lifetime, and your mom was always talking about how that was going to be your greatest asset. And so, as in, you know, being able to secure a good marriage, have beautiful babies, that kind of thing. And Spirit saying that, you know, while that was a very normal thing for women to say and to take into consideration, and it was, you know, not because they were horrible people, but just more so because that was what was valued, and that was like the way of life at that time, basically. Because it's not like women could really do a whole lot for themselves unless they were married. So, but Spirit's saying there was always a part of you that deep down inside kind of did feel almost like an ick about it. Like, that's really all I am worth, is being pretty enough to be some rich guy's wife someday. And, you know, that's what's going to be valued. And I'm not guaranteed that I'm going to be happy or in love or safe or any of the things that you felt like mattered. And so Spirit's even saying at times, because you felt like your parents and your family and the people around you really did make such a priority of like talking about that and almost like I guess we would call it like grooming you to like understand that and to try to like, then be able to use it to your advantage someday. And Spirit saying, you started really to worry that maybe your whole family was going to kind of just depend on you to step up and get married off to, somebody of a high status so that they could bank on it. And that if that was their mindset, then it was like, are you going to sell me off to some old man? Are you going to sell me off to somebody that's a drunk or abusive? And then I have no escape from that because you really felt like their financial freedom and security is more important to them than my own well-being. And Spirit is saying that sadly those worries came true because the Emperor's men decided that you looked like the type of woman that he would be interested in. And I don't even know if I would say woman because Spirit's saying you were 13. So, little girl, in our context today. Maybe that was like the equivalent of being 40 then, who knows. But for today's world, that was definitely a little girl. And so, this wasn't about you actually getting married. It was more like you being basically trafficked. And Spirit saying that your family, were always kind of like, we want you to marry well. But that all kind of went out of the window when here comes, the Emperor's people and they're like, oh, we want to give you money and you'll be taken care of each month. We'll make sure that you have a piece of land that you own and you always have food and this and that. The Spirit's saying that your dad was kind of a little bit of a drunk and lazy. And it's like he worked, but bare minimum just to get by for you guys. And that's also kind of why you guys moved around quite a bit. And he was always kind of like looking for like a get rich quick scheme, where's that one little thing that I can sell or come up with that's going to make us a bunch of money and then I just can sit on my butt and drink and never work again. So that's why they were so financially motivated to, have you be the one that would go out there and secure a better life for yourself. And then in return, they would benefit. So Spirit saying, they were all on board. You were not. You were forced to leave with them. And you were absolutely terrified. But when you got to the harem, you were definitely even more scared because you knew that, number one, your whole family was depending on you back home. You knew that all of the girls that were already there, probably you figured out pretty quickly, saw you as some sort of a competition because they all wanted to be the king's favorite. And that girls who didn't do what they were supposed to, nobody ever saw or heard from them again. And Spirit saying you sunk into a very deep depression, realizing that you were going to be there probably for the rest of your life. And if you did somehow get out, it was going to be because the current emperor passed away and the one who would take his place wouldn't want to take care of all these old ladies anymore, and it would, God knows what your fate would be after that. So it was like somebody who's been convicted, of a false crime and is now facing life in prison and having to accept that that's their life now, is the way that Spirit's describing it, which was incredibly difficult for you. And heartbreaking, and you also felt extremely betrayed by your family because you thought for sure when they were, you know, going back and forth about whether or not they were going to let you go, you thought like, no, they want me to get married, like they would never agree to this. So Spirit is saying you had to grow up very quickly, and you had to figure out how to do things that you were never talked to and prepared for, i.e., have sex with a grown ass man. And thankfully, there was an older woman who was sort of like, she was the former, because I guess you would call them concubines. I can't think of whatever word that we would use for it, so I'm just going to refer to concubines. She was the former one for his father's harem, and Spirit is saying that she got to stick around as kind of, you know, like a sorority mom of sorts, to guide the new girls and make sure that they were okay and being taken care of. And so she took you under her wing and kind of taught you everything that you needed to know to how to get along within the palace, how to kind of protect yourself, who to stay away from so that you didn't have to worry about, you know, dealing with too much like jealousies, and what you needed to do when it came time to do what you needed to do with Mr. Emperor. So a couple years into that, when you would kind of, you know, learned how to get by and kind of, you know, settled into what your new normal would be, she ended up passing away. So you suddenly felt like you didn't have, you know, your person that you could really truly trust. And at the same time, there was new girls coming in. And so it became a really stressful time for you. And at the same time, you found out that you were pregnant. And Spirit saying that the women who would have children for the Emperor, that was like a whole nother level of complicated, because they would be obviously seeing their children, especially if they were boy children, as the potential future ruler. And Spirit is saying that they would do horrible things to each other to try to get rid of each other and each other's children in order to secure, you know, their destiny and their lineage. So what Spirit is saying with that is, you were about 6 months in and you woke up in the middle of the night and you were just shaking, sweating, throwing up, and couldn't stop. You were having horrible pains throughout your body, and you ended up in very early labor with your child, and you realized that you had probably been poisoned. And nobody was willing around you to go to try to get any medical help for you, or anybody who would know what they were doing. And you were so sick and in so much pain and having such a horrible time that you couldn't, you know, crawl even out of the room that you were in. And the girl who did it to you was the one that was pretending to try to help you and to care about what was going on. And both you and your baby ended up passing away from this. And how that ties into today is that Spirit's saying that not only, are we seeing a few public figures go through something pretty similar to, your situation, like Britney Spears, where it's kind of like her family was so greedy that they were willing to lock her up in this conservatorship and do all these horrible things to her in order to financially benefit. But also, it ties into a lot of the things that Spirit is saying that you still struggle with today. Betrayals, trust issues, feeling or worried that you don't fully have control over your life because your parents have certain ideas about how your life is supposed to go, or they may not even have any idea about how your life is supposed to go, but they just strongly oppose, it's like they, not in a sense of like, we want you to be a doctor, and it's the overbearing Asian parents that are gonna like not let up on you and force you to like become a doctor, engineer, or lawyer. But more so like even just normal everyday life shit, like they constantly feel like they have to control like those aspects of your life. And I do feel like the family that you have around you was the family that you had in that past life. And remember, we've all been the villain in somebody's story at some point in time. And people can get better through lifetimes. That's why we keep coming back, to learn lessons and to make amends, and grow out of certain behaviors or faults or things that we have done in the past. So this isn't to say like, oh, screw your parents now, they're horrible people and have always been horrible people. It's just Spirit is saying that some of that dynamic is still carried over into this lifetime. And for you to understand where that comes from, and to understand that that is a lesson to struggle, but it will ultimately be a lesson on both sides for you guys to both learn in this lifetime. For you to learn how to separate yourself from that and stand up for yourself, and for them to understand that just because you gave birth to somebody does not mean that you are forever in control of every single thing that they do, and that they have to live a life that you decided for them, that they get to make, their own decisions in this lifetime. And Spirit is also saying that there's a part of you as well that worries constantly that you are going to end up with the wrong person, or that your family won't accept the right person. And that fear is deeply rooted in this lifetime. So, as always, when it comes to stuff like that comes up that may be connected to soul wounds, what Spirit advises is pray to release that. Kind of sit with this and go over it and think about it and journal if you have to, and say some affirmations to yourself about how you release the burden of the soul wounds that is still affecting you in this lifetime, and that you are healed and you are not going to allow that to affect you going forwards. And that's something that you can do for anything you need to heal from in general anyways. You just make it a mantra that you repeat to yourself when you feel that coming up or influencing anything, and you keep saying it until you reprogram yourself to believe like, nope, I'm not letting that thing bother me anymore, I'm moving forwards. So anyways, my love, I hope that this helps. I hope you have an amazing day. Whitney is obviously in the background saying hi. And thank you so much, and I will talk to you later. Bye.